What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button, and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to
begin with, it is traditional to remind that the difference between the number of cars shipped to dealers and those actually registered is normal. Brands with large sales have more dealers with extensive stock, while small sales mean minimal stock or no stock at all for specific orders. In addition, the same inventory plays a role when demand is up or down. When sales are up, registrations may even exceed shipments to dealers due to empty warehouses. And, finally, it should be understood that even cars shipped to dealers still bring profit to manufacturers. The only question is the nuances of payment and so on. But it is still interesting to look at the big difference between the volume of so-called yellow cars sent to dealers and the number of actual registrations. It sometimes gives rise to ambiguous situations. Before we move on to sales of specific brands, let us assess the overall market situation. As we remember, AEB reported market growth of 15.1% to 1,260,111 cars. The statistics of registrations has its own opinion about the volume of purchased cars. 1,158,013 cars were registered, 100,000 less over the 3 quarters. However, the market growth rate here is not much lower than according to official data. A little over 1 million cars were registered in the 3 quarters of last year, so the number of registrations grew by 13.5%. Not as strong as AEB's 15.1%, but still not bad. Especially considering that the second half of 2021 was marred by a new global problem, a shortage of electronic components to make cars, which created shortages in the primary market and explosive price increases for the end buyer. So the fourth quarter is unlikely to please with positive statistics. But for now, let's not guess and take a look at the figures already available. Premium segment. Let's start, as usual, with the premium segment, and here the first revelation of 2021 awaits us at once: sales growth. Here is almost twice as strong as in the middle price segment. Even if we leave aside Genesis, which only started selling last year, the average growth in the group of positive brands is about 25%. That is, expensive cars began to sell better by a quarter at once. However, the success did not affect everyone. Let's start with the big German 3. Audi is doing well. 13.5 thousand new cars were registered in 3 quarters, and this figure almost coincides with the AEB's stated data of 13.9 thousand cars sold. At the same time, the share of last year's cars is small. 2.5 thousand were sold in the first quarter, and for the remaining 2 quarters only about 400, so the increase is quite honest. The only nuance concerns the percentage of this very growth. In the report of AEB it is 37%, and according to the statistics of registrations only 26%. However, it is still a lot. BMW has a slightly lower percentage increase, but it is crystal clear: 20% according to AEB and 19% according to registrations. Besides, the Bavarians have moved to the absolute first place in terms of sales, if in the first quarter in the AEB report they were the second after Mercedes-Benz, although they overtook it in terms of registrations, but now the official statistics show 35.5 thousand cars, which is almost the same as the 34.7 thousand that have been registered. Mercedes-Benz, however, lagged behind not much. 30.5 thousand cars received registration, although it is less than 33.8 thousand indicated in the report of AEB. And the growth is also a little less unambiguous: 23% in official figures against plus 19% in real ones. Lexus is on the third line of the list of leaders, and the ratio of sales and registrations is as ideal as that of BMW: 15.7 thousand registrations and 15.9 thousand in the report. True, the increase is slightly lower than the others, 11%. But, as they say, it's not much, but it's a fair performance. Most of the other premium brands also performed well. For example, Volvo was fourth in the segment with nearly 7,000 cars sold. And even though the percentage increase in registrations is lower than the AEB report, 31% vs. 40%, but the statistics of registrations coincide with the report with the accuracy of units. Behind Volvo are Land Rover and Porsche, which sold about 4,800 and 4,600 cars respectively. The percentages here aren't all smooth either, but the increase is still a fair one, especially considering the small proportion of last year's cars. Brands of the third echelon in terms of sales volume also turned out to be successful. Mini, for example, has even a noticeably higher increase in registrations than officially announced, 23% vs. 16%. At Cadillac and Genesis these indicators are much higher. American cars were registered 86% more, and Korean cars at once by 128%. However, Genesis continues to fill dealer network. AEB reported about 2,454 sold cars, but only 1,809 cars were registered. But these are not last year's cars, but all fresh cars. Jeep failed to improve its position as much as the others, and in terms of percentages it fell into the group of false positives. The AEB report shows an increase of 6%, but the registrations show a slight decrease of 1% compared to last year. The only consolation is that the reported sales are very close to the data on registrations. Infiniti and Jaguar are doing very badly. The Japanese brand reported a growth of 18%, and 16% fewer cars were registered than last year. And that's not the only nuance. Despite the fact that the absolute figures in the AEB reports and the statistics of the state automobile inspection are almost the same, amounting to about 1.5 thousand cars, 900 of them are last year's. In general, worse indicators only at Jaguar, which showed an honest fall almost twice. Medium and budget segment. If the average growth of premium brands amounted to 25%, then in the middle and budget segment this figure is significantly lower. Even if we take only those who showed positive dynamics, it averages about 14%. And if we talk not about the average temperature of the hospital, but about actual sales, they have grown even weaker. Lada, however, is doing consistently well. Even taking into account the constant price hikes, the seventh one for the year took place in December, and now the base grantor costs almost 600,000 and Vesta more than 800,000. Sales are growing, and the statistics of registrations even overtake the AEB data, showing an increase of 19% against 18%. Given the situation with shortages and markups at dealers of almost all brands, it will be interesting to see the situation early next year. Hyundai and Kia traditionally complete the top three in terms of sales and registrations. There is, however, an important nuance: the stated growth of Kia exceeds the real one almost twice, and that of Hyundai more than 3 times. However, the number of cars registered at Kia is only 5,000 cars less than announced, and at Hyundai by 10,000, which, in the total scale of 120 to 150,000 units, can be partly attributed to the overstocking of warehouses, not the most scarce models. But at Renault the real growth even exceeded the declared 100,000 cars were registered, which is 16% more than a year earlier, and in the report of AEB there is a figure of plus 12%. Apparently, here, against the background of shortage and price growth, buyers have raked out all the stocks. The year so far has been as successful for Skoda as for the French. The German Czech manufacturer also has a positive bias. The data on registrations overtake the official statistics. However, if we talk about absolute indicators, the registered cars were 2,000 less than those shipped to dealers. Toyota and Subaru managed to reverse the negative trend of the first quarter and increased real sales by 8% and 13% respectively. Suzuki was also able to show a fair increase of 27%, even though the AEB data shows an even more impressive figure of 38%. Mazda did not lag behind their Japanese colleagues, having sold 21,000 cars and increased sales by 12%. Of the major players, only Volkswagen once again had contradictory results, with the announced growth of 2% fewer cars were registered. However, this does not mean that things are bad. Volkswagen remains among the leaders in sales, along with Toyota and Skoda, with a figure of 70,000 cars. Only Nissan and Mitsubishi reported negative results in the growing market. The first one honestly reported a 12% decrease in sales, but the second one's dynamics differs almost 5 times, with losses in the AEB report by 5%, the number of registrations decreased by 24% at once. However, the number of sold cars is close to the number of registrations, so the drop can be partly explained by the high base effect. For Peugeot, Citroën and Opel brands, one should look only at the dynamics of cars registered. The fact is that the AEB statistics include sales of light commercial vehicles, while the data of the State Automobile Inspection Service not, so the data on sales differ by times. Well, and the victory speeches about the growth in the number of registrations by 108% for Peugeot and 211% for Opel hide 1549 and 218 cars respectively. So this is a very localized victory. Negative results of Honda cannot be surprised. Against the background of officially announced withdrawal from the market in 2022, sales cannot grow. Of the smaller players, we can note the success of GM, both real, which sells crossovers Tahoe, Traverse and Trailblazer, and Uzbek, which has brought back to the market Spark, Nexia and Cobalt. Chinese brands have been able to take the strongest advantage of the combination of market growth, price increases, and the beginning of a shortage. Whether mass market or premium, the percentages are in the tens and hundreds of %. And we are not talking about an increase in sales from 10 cars to 100, but about a serious turn of buyers towards Chinese cars. Of course, we have to admit that this turn is largely forced, but on the other hand, absolutely all leading Chinese brands were able to play on the weaknesses of other brands. As at the beginning of the year, Chery and Haval are fighting for the first line. And the situation is also similar with the specifics of sales. According to AEB data, Haval slightly overtakes Chery, 25,053 sold cars against 24,688. But those are shipments to dealers, but the situation is absolutely opposite in terms of the number of registrations. If Haval has a small share of yellow cars and a little less than 24,000 cars were registered, Chery's registrations significantly exceed dealer orders, 28,000 cars against 24.5. That is, Chery in practice has grown more than others, actively selling off the stock. So, if Haval's growth rate of 115%, declared by AEB, is absolutely honest, Chery's growth rate is even underestimated, because 370% more cars were registered, and only 288% were included in the statistics. At the same time, if in the first quarter Chery made a cash register, only one Tiggo 4 then at the end of 3 quarters sales were distributed between it, as well as Tiggo 7 and Tiggo 8. Tiggo 8 not surprisingly, the brand continues to expand the model range. For example, recently debuted the Tiggo 8 Pro. The third place among Chinese brands remains stable for Geely. Here the Chinese also felt the market trends and added a hybrid to the model lineup Atlas Pro. However, the backbone of sales is formed by the old Atlas and the compact Coolray, which was a hit. As a result, Geely ended the 3 quarters with a result of almost 17,000 cars, with registrations here also slightly ahead of shipments to dealers. Incredible percentages were registered by smaller players. Great Wall reminded of itself with a pickup truck Power, and together with the old Wingle sold 864 cars, showing an increase of 5,300%. Against the background of 0 last year. Another shocking result of 21,800% was demonstrated by Exceed brand, which recently managed to be renamed from Chery Exceed. From 2322 cars declared by AEB, only 1533 cars were registered, but the plans on sales expansion are confirmed by novelties. The crossover TXL crossover TXL VX and the compact LX is next in line. The only notable Chinese brand on the market that did not become successful is Chang'an. It, however, was marked by active sale of warehouses, so that the statistics of registrations even turned out to be in the plus, although, according to AEB, it is listed in a deep minus. Many promised novelties like CS75 Plus remained unrealized, but the Chinese have already received OTTS for the crossover Unique, which they promised to bring to dealers by the end of 2021. Let's see if these promises will come true and sales will start to grow. Among more modest players we can mention GAC. The brand also has big plans, but sales are still modest, about 500 cars in 3 quarters. Even FAW and JAC sold 2 to 3 times more, although the former simply got rid of the stock of cars of 2019 to 2020 production years. What to expect next? Taking into account the prolonged shortage of electronic components and dealers' antics, we should expect a drop in sales in the fourth quarter, which will certainly continue into the beginning of next year. The main intrigue now is how many cars will be bought in the fourth quarter at inflated prices and how big the real and declared final annual growth will be. According to AEB, only 6.9% more new cars were sold in January-November 2021 than in the same period in 2020. And given that the registration statistics turn out to be more modest in volume than the AEB report, we have every chance of seeing an even greater drawdown in 2021 than in the past. In conclusion, the third quarter of this year has highlighted the complex dynamics of the Russian market, showcasing China's growing dominance and the premium growth that accompanies it. As we navigate through these intriguing developments, it is clear that the interplay between economic strategies and geopolitical factors will continue to shape the landscape. Stakeholders must remain vigilant and adaptable to harness the opportunities and address the challenges that lie ahead. Thank you for joining us as we explored these pivotal trends in the Russian market.